Hello, and welcome to the Wade Borth podcast. I'm your host, Wade Borth, and in every episode, my goal is to get you to think differently about how money works and ultimately to empower you to take control of your money and your personal financing system. Hello and welcome. So today we're going to talk about identifying the problem. And what I mean by that is, first off, what is the problem? And it's a problem around how do we think and what we want and where do we want to go? I was recently at the Infinite Banking Symposium down in Birmingham, Alabama, and this subject came up a lot, where people were talking about, in Nelson's book, Becoming Your Own Banker, he has a chapter just dedicated to the problem. And his focus is of the problem around financing and how we see financing. And we'll touch on that in a different podcast, and we'll do a separate breakdown on that chapter, the problem that he has there. But it sparked an even bigger question. And part of the discussion we were having in a number of the different groups down there was, what is really the problem? What is the problem that most people have? What's the problem that I have? And quite frankly, everybody has. And Nelson also does a really good job of kind of bringing that to light as well. But from a much broader perspective, we think about what is the problem. So let me give you just a couple quick examples and have some discussion around there, talk about what the problem is and how we see it. And I think it's one of the first things to increasing productivity, becoming a lot more financially independent, being more successful, finding these freedoms that we talk about. So what kind of freedoms do we want? And some of the freedoms we want in our lives, the freedom of money, right? So if we have more money, what do we do? And then some of the other questions might be, or some of the other freedoms might be freedom of time. Again, if we could find a way to identify what the problem is, could we find more time for ourselves, which will lead to some of the other freedoms, which are freedom of relationship and freedom of purpose. Again, wouldn't it be nice to have more time to spend with your family, your significant other, whoever it might be, just to build a relationship, business partners, having conversations around how we can get much bigger and better. Because right now, today, we're so busy, not everyone, but the majority of people are so busy in this rat race of trying to figure out just to stay ahead. And we're working harder instead of taking a step back, having this relationship with our business partners or ourselves or our God or whoever it might be, to say, how can I do this better? How can I be more efficient? How can I find these freedoms I'm looking for in order to fulfill this purpose? And again, this freedom of purpose that we want. And again, identifying the problem I think really starts with identifying how ingrained our paradigm is. And what I mean by that is, I was having a discussion with another gentleman, and that's where we came down to this conclusion, is like, the paradigm people start with is typically, in Nelson, in his book as well, and if you ever had a chance to meet Nelson Nash or have a conversation with him like I have, he'll tell you have to rethink your thinking, right? You have to evaluate your paradigm, because it typically always starts with your paradigm. And what I mean by that, our paradigm is just that thought process that tells us that everything has to be done a certain way. And we've done it this way in the past, or this is what we think where we want to go. But if we take a step back and say, that is just our vision of what we're seeing and how we do it. So if you could imagine looking at, you're going to go hiking through the mountains and you want to get to a certain point on the next peak. But if you're looking at the trail through the aspects of a straw, it doesn't give you a lot of possibilities. So you think you have to go straight ahead. Straight ahead might be the worst way to get there. And that's your paradigm. But just because that's your paradigm and that's what you think is the only way to do it, you walk straight ahead, and that might walk you off a cliff or might walk you down into a bunch of deadfall trying to get to the peak on the other side of the valley. Where if you would just take that straw away from your eyes and say, what better way is there? Let me take a look around. That would be the first start in identifying what your paradigm is, what your conditioned thought process is about how you're supposed to think, and say maybe there's a better way, and be open to a better way. And there's so many people we run across that resist being educated, thinking that there's a better way to go about things. And quite frankly, those are probably people that aren't going to be my clients, that aren't going to be agents that I work with, because we want to be open to different ideas. We want to have our hearts and our minds open to saying, is this the best way? Because I have to do that. I have to make sure that I don't get caught in this very myopic, this very closed view of what is the way to go about it. Because when you do that, then you become unteachable. And people that are unteachable again, are they going to be looking at life through a straw and then walk over that cliff? Hopefully not. I try to fight that every day. And so I was listening to a gentleman by the name of Todd Bookspan, who has a company, Win by Noon. And his perspective was, if we do things like we're told to do, it's always going to be a rat race. And this is my words, not his, but this is what I was taking from it. And then when it's a rat race, do you want to be involved in that rat race? Where if we could find a consistent, steady way of ordering and structuring our day, wouldn't that be a much better approach versus having the day running and construct us? And his point was, is there a better way? And again, his point was never to work till noon and then quit. His system is called Win by Noon. So if you can win by noon, then everything after noon is gravy. It's huge. And that's where truly successful people thrive, is that they've taken this position of, okay, I can win by noon, and then I have half a day where I can take and expand my thought process, and again, expand these freedoms that we're looking for, again, the freedoms of money, time, relationship, and purpose, to be a much bigger and better thinker. And if you look at the true entrepreneurs in this world, the people that are making a huge impact, they check their paradigm every day. They don't. If we look at Elon Musk, again, this is a great example. Elon Musk is a guy that had taken a century-old industry and has turned it on its ear a little bit. It's not that he created something new or something big. He took an old, stodgy industry, the auto industry, and says, people are wanting electric cars. Let's find a way to make cool, excitable, wanted electric cars by the whole public. And he started a whole industry. Again, he didn't take and create something brand new. He just took a step back and said, is there a better way? And he's finding a better way. Now, is he ultimately going to be successful? I have no doubts in my mind that it will be. Will Tesla be successful? I don't know. It's looking like it is right now, but who knows? But that's not the point. The point is that just by changing your paradigm, changing your thought process of how things should be done to how things could be done, is where he has now created this multi-billion-dollar business in an old, stodgy industry. And I call it stodgy because it's the automobile industry. It's been using the combustion engine for over 100 years. And so that's where he's taking this process and changing it and putting it on its ear. So that was a bit of the discussion we were having at the symposium. And another thing that I found rather interesting was where most people want to, when they're talking with individuals and they're talking with clients or other agents, I see a lot of it, and I probably do it as well. I know I do it as well, is we always want to start with the solution. We're so excited to help people or put them in a better position that we go right to the end with a solution. And most people think, hey, that's great. But at the end of the day, if people don't know they have a problem and they can't identify what that problem is, and they're not willing to accept that maybe there's a better way, then the solution doesn't really make a whole lot of difference. Working with clients, it's okay, what is the problem? What is it you want? Ultimately, at the end of the day, what's the point that's stopping them from being who they are and finding these freedoms that they're looking for? And once they realize that and can identify that, the next step comes to, are you willing to do what has to be done? Are you willing to do what has to be done to make that work, right? To make those changes, to solve those problems in your life. And then the next step would be to teach that process of how we go about it. So we've identified the problem. We've agreed that we want to solve the problem in your life. And this has to be your agreement. That's not my agreement. It has to be, you're the one that's making that agreement. I'm just here to empower you to get there at the end of the day. Then we find strategies and then ultimately salute how we get that done. That ultimately has to be the process that people go through. But again, there's so many people in the financial world, in the IBC world, is where we all want to start with the solution in hand versus identifying what the problem is. And then say, okay, with that being the known problem, are we willing to shift our paradigm a little bit? Are we willing to step back and go, yeah, maybe there is a better way, and then saying, I want to get better, I want to get well, and then having a discussion with a professional and say, okay, what are some strategies we can put in place, and then what are those products that can support that strategy? I think if we take that approach versus jumping to the end, it's much more fulfilling for everybody involved. So again, if I walked into it, I heard this from another practitioner. It was rather interesting. He says, imagine you walking into a doctor. He says, okay, you need this shot and we'll schedule surgery for Thursday. And You're sitting there going, what the heck's wrong with me? He didn't identify the problem first. So think about that real quick. He's already told you that you need this medicine and the surgery on Thursday, but you haven't talked about what the problem is. You haven't really got down to what the root problem is. Asking the patient, do you want to get better? Is this something you want to go through? Because it's not always easy. Is it worth the time and the effort? Are there alternatives? Here's the other part about addressing our paradigm. Is there alternatives? Is there a better way maybe than just the standard medicine, the shots, and the operation? Is there nutrition that helps? Are there all these other things that should be brought into that? Because again, the medical profession is very, very stuck in their paradigm. They think there's only one way, and that's typically treat it with medicine, instead of the mind can be a tremendous tool when it comes to healing. So all these things that we have to, when we go through anything, we have to step back and say, what's their paradigm and what's my paradigm? And when we have to address that and say, is there a better way? Take a look at all options. Which is the one that's going to get me where I want to be, right? Looking for the solution, but the strategies and the solutions along the way. But don't start with the solution in mind, because again, then it doesn't apply to that individual person. It was just an interesting set of conversations we had amongst a bunch of different practitioners at this conference. And I wanted to share that with you because I just found it amazing where everybody wants to jump to the solution, where nobody really wants to address what the problem is. And I didn't say nobody, that's probably not fair, where a lot of people don't want to address the problem. And it's really even hard to identify what that means. What is the problem? It usually starts with our thinking, right? We have to rethink our thinking. We have to be open to possible solutions that we never thought of. We have to just imagine, use our imagination of, if we want 3 or 4, 10 times our income, that doesn't mean we have to 3 or 4 or 10 times how much work we do. Maybe there's a possibility where we can work less and increase our income. But until you're open to that thought process, I don't know that you're going to move forward in solving the problem, if you're even able to identify the problem. So with that being said, all I challenge you today is reach out to us. Let's have that conversation. Let's see what the problem is. Bring in other people and say, what do you think the problem is? Or help me identify what the problem is, because sometimes it's so close to us that we can't see it. But it usually starts with rethink our thinking, right? Have people challenge what we think. Be open-minded to it. Don't make it confrontational, but just allow them to bring a different idea to you and say, does this work for you? What do you see? Let's shoot holes in this thing. Let's find a way to find a better way for you to either, in whatever aspect of life it is. It could be in the financial world. It could be in the relationship world. It could be in your health world. So whatever that might be, challenge your existing thought process. And if somebody says you don't want to do that, then what are you afraid of? I'm open to having people challenge what I think. And it's not always comfortable, but you have to be open with that idea. Challenge what you think, because again, I want to make sure that I'm not looking through a straw. Because it becomes real easy as everything creeps inside into your sight over years and maybe even decades of how you think about things. It crowds your vision to be very, like I said, like looking through a straw. Although being focused can be hugely beneficial, but when you're looking to identify a problem and find a solution, because you're in, some sort of, it's either emotional pain or financial pain or whatever it might be, you want to change. And so we have to take a step back and say, let's not let this 3 or 4 or 5 decades of thought process creep into our thoughts, into our vision. Sometimes we want to take a step back, and sometimes in order to take a step back and look at that, you have to engage with other individuals. Find professionals that are trained to do that, like I said, whatever world it might be, if it's in the financial or medical or religious or whatever it is that you're looking for to change. Find somebody, right? Find that person that can help you change, at least identify your paradigm, see if you want to change that, go in and agree that you want to change and move forward, and then put together some strategies and some things in order to make that happen, and then have that commitment to continue to do that. And I think that's probably the first step, is when we talk about the problem, is helping identify it. And then once you can identify it, then there's all kinds of different ways to attack it. And that's really what we're here for. And that's really what people need to do if they want something different than they currently have or they're currently going to have. It's that whole idea of, I want something better than what I see myself on a pathway now. Again, drop the straw, get people to help you identify it. So again, if you look for additional help going forward, check out some other podcasts, because our podcast and what we talk about and the people that are around here are very open to challenging the current paradigm. And again, I challenge people to challenge my paradigm as well, because again, I'm not afraid to have it challenged and maybe look that maybe there's a better way. But I think if you get onto, listen to the rest of our podcast, read the literature and the writings that we have on Sage Wealth strategy, it's about being open-minded. And it's about saying, is there a better way to get what you want, not what everybody else has. So I think that's probably the biggest thing, is get what you want, and it's going to fulfill you, to give you those freedoms that we talked about, and not end up like everybody else. So thank you for your time. If you're enjoying this podcast or know anyone else that might be interested, please be sure to hit the subscribe button and please leave a review. This will help this podcast reach and help more people by ranking higher in searches, and ultimately help more people get out of financial bondage. And don't be afraid to share this podcast with your friends and family, as we can be easily found on Apple Podcasts and Spotify.